All right, we're going to read Grace, Part 4. We're in Chapter 8, in Melody's Shop. After vacation, it was back to school as usual. Grace was happy to see all of her classmates again. A new girl had joined them, too, Corliss Milliken. Her father had taken a job with the city's public works department. Corliss wore her blonde braids wrapped around her head. It's like a halo, but a little old-fashioned, Grace thought as she looked at the girl's fair, round face. Corliss was as quiet as a mouse. At recess, Grace and Margaret invited her to play with them. She hesitated at first, but then shyly joined in a game of tag. She's a dainty little thing, but skittish as a kitten, Margaret remarked later. Well, wouldn't you be shy coming to a new school in the middle of the year? Grace asked. Well, maybe not, knowing you, Margaret. They both laughed. She has a slight accent when she talks, and I saw Lolly and Nola look at her kind of skeptical-like. Then they walked off and snubbed her. Margaret looked disgusted. Oh well, Lolly, Jones, and Nola Hampton. Don't cotton to too many of us, anyway, Grace said. Corliss' accent is German. She told me that in her family they speak both German and English. Her dad's American, and her mother was born in Germany. That's where the family has lived for the last 5 years. They just recently returned to Wisconsin. I'm sure Lolly and Nola think her hairdo is old-fashioned too. Anyway, I think it's silly to make fun of someone because they're not fashionable. Grace turned up her nose and minced across the room to imitate the way Lolly sometimes walked. Margaret shrugged. Corliss clothes are clean, even if they're not fashionable. Well, my dresses have been tucked, shortened, and lengthened more times than I can count. I wear my sister's hand-me-downs. I hardly ever have new things. Daisy did wonders with the much-worn clothes of Grace's older sisters. Where the material wore thin, she'd applique a flower in a contrasting color. When a let-down hem showed the previous hemline, she'd cover it with rick-rack or a ruffle. And sometimes she took a dress completely apart and put it together in a whole new way. Margaret told Grace that she was lucky that Daisy was so handy with a needle and thread. Margaret's mother often said that Daisy was the best apprentice she'd ever had. The weeks passed, and Corliss became more at ease with the girls near her age and grade. Still, she remained quiet and a little reserved. She wasn't the quickest student, nor the slowest. Of course, Lolly and Nola ignored her completely. One afternoon, Margaret suggested that they take Corliss to Melody's shop and show her around. Do you think your mother would mind, long as we behave? Grace wondered. She won't care, Margaret replied. She grabbed Corliss's hand. Come on. Margaret and Grace had never been allowed to play in the shop, but if they were quiet and mannerly, they could enjoy a few moments looking around Melody's shop. Melody's shop was well known for its excellence in dressmaking and tailoring, and both local women and those from nearby towns came there to shop for cloth and notions. The 2 wide showroom windows were kept smudge-free. The window displays were always stylish and attractive, and the store itself was bright and cheery. The 3 friends walked through its doorway. Just inside the shop they stopped, and Corliss let out a low gasp. Before her eyes were shelves holding bolts of fabric, gingham, calico, flowered and plain cottons, lovely plaid wools, silk, and airy netting which Daisy had said was used for weddings. On a nearby rack, spools of sewing and crochet threads in a rainbow of colors were neatly stacked next to skeins of yarn. Corliss pulled her gaze from the threads to see sewing needles, quilting needles, knitting needles, and crochet hooks. Bonnets, gloves, and lace fans were displayed on a small table, and hats trimmed with flowers and veils stood on another. Corliss stood dumbstruck. Oh my, "I've never seen such a wonderful store," she whispered. "How I'd love to work here when I grow up." Daisy and two other girls worked as apprentices in the back fitting room of the store where they measured, trimmed, cut, and sewed, all under the careful supervision of Mrs. Murphy. Early in her training, Daisy had surprised both herself and Mrs. Murphy when she'd learned to cut out a dress without the aid of a pattern. "Daisy is a natural," Mrs. Murphy had told Mama. "She just seems to understand graceful lines and the flow and drape of the fabrics." First, Daisy sketched whatever she planned to make, and then, by using precise measurements, she could cut the fabric and create a beautiful gown, dress, skirt, or blouse. In time, Daisy knew she and Gustav would be married. She loved imagining their wedding and enjoyed looking at the few fashion magazines and pattern books which Mrs. Murphy ordered from New York City. Every stitch in her wedding dress would be made with love. Grace and Margaret took Corliss over to the two long mirrors that stood near one wall. The girls preened and primped, imagining themselves wearing beautiful gowns with long gloves up to their elbows and high-heeled shoes. Margaret said in a low whisper to Grace, "May I help you, madam? Have you seen our beautiful fabrics from France and these soft wool shawls direct from Scotland?" Smiling graciously, Grace quietly replied with an affected accent, "Please, do you have some Irish linen in powder blue?" Corliss giggled and joined in the fun. Then they quietly and politely left the store after thanking Mrs. Murphy and her sales clerk, Mary Ellen Chamberlain. In Daisy's estimation of all the ladies in New London, Mary Ellen had the best taste in clothing. "It's not that she acts superior or puts on airs," Daisy had told Mama. "She knows what looks good on her, and she wears her clothes well. Not even Lydia Pettibone, who had lots of money, had more style." Lydia did have more money to spend on the latest fashions, but she didn't have more flair. Grace had edged close to Mama and Daisy so she could hear every word of their conversation. Mama agreed with Daisy. "Mary Ellen is a working girl. She doesn't come from wealth or from nobility, but she has excellent taste in clothing and in her conduct." After that, whenever Grace happened to see or meet Mary Ellen, she took note of the way the young woman walked and talked, how she combed her hair, and how she spoke to those she met or waited upon in the shop. "That's how I want to be, polite and tasteful, even if I don't have lots of money. At least I can look nice, have good manners, and be neat and clean." Sometimes when Grace was by herself, she practiced walking slowly and gracefully around her room. Holding the mirror, she'd pull her hair back and up, turning this way and that to look at herself. Her sisters all told her she had the prettiest hair in the family, and in her heart of hearts, Grace liked to think that that was true. Grace knew that her family didn't have a lot of money, but they were happy and satisfied with their lot in life. Oh, of course, the sisters sometimes complained that they didn't have many dresses. Sometimes one would ask the other, "Well, what should I wear to church today? My best alpaca?" Alpaca was a thin material that contained wool from alpaca animals with a soft fur that lived in Peru. Their question was a joke, for the Parfit girls only had one alpaca dress each. But their mother, in her own much-worn outfit, would give loving counsel. "If you behave half as nice as you look, girls, you'll do well." Early in childhood, Grace learned that manners were more important than clothes. That evening, during supper, Grace told the family about taking Corliss to Milady's shop. "I don't know if she'd ever been in a dress shop before," Grace added. "She was so excited about everything." Edwin said that Corliss's brother, Caleb, was in his grade. "I like him," he said. "He's smart and he's nice. He can add columns of several figures in his head and come up with the answer before I can, using paper and pencil." "I think he's quite good-looking," Hetty mused. "Oh," teased Edwin and John immediately. Are you sweet on Caleb? John teased, drawing out the word sweet. Yeah, said Edwin. Have you set your cap for him? Oh, go on with you both, Hetty laughed. I think he's nice. He's my age, you know, but he's behind in school because of their stay in Germany. Is he your boyfriend? Asked Grace, her eyes wide with curiosity. Yes, honey, Hetty said gently. He's a boy, and he's a friend. But he's not my beau. There is a difference, you know. Chapter 9, Annie's Secret. The school year was passing swiftly, or so it seemed to Grace, and so were the snow and ice, much to her regret. The snowfalls didn't come so close together, and when it did snow, it melted quickly. The river was almost thawed, and today the air was definitely warmer. Grace stood at the kitchen window, a dish towel in her hand. She was watching an early robin hop from place to place in the sparse green grass. Now he stopped, cocked his head, and darted forward. A moment later she laughed out loud when the bird hopped away with a worm dangling from his beak. So that's what it means by the early bird gets the worm, she said aloud to herself. This silly robin should still be in the south, but here he was, fattening himself on worms and maybe even starting to build a nest. She'd have to be on the lookout for a Mrs. Redbreast. She pricked up her ears at the sound of a horse and buggy in front of the house. When she heard it stop, she put down the plate she was drawing and went to see who it was. To her delight, it was her sister, Annie. Grace was always glad when her sister Annie came to visit. 18 years older than Grace, she was married and a young mother, and Annie and her husband Reynolds Stern had a young son that Grace thought was a cutie. Dell's blue eyes sparkled, and his little round face was always smiling. He seemed more like a little brother to her than a nephew. Dell loved her, too, and whenever they were together he was right on her heels. She'd sweep him up in her arms, hold him on her lap, and clap his little hands, saying, patty cake, baker's man, make me a cookie as fast as you can. Roll it and mark it with D, and throw it in the oven for Dell and me. Oh, how he giggled when she threw his arms wide to throw the cookie in the oven. Calling up the stairs to let her mother know they had company, Grace watched as Reynolds carefully helped Annie down from the wagon. Grace ran out to get Dell, then followed the little boy's parents into the house. Mother and Annie were kissing hello. Annie gave Grace a hug, and Reynolds took Dell from her arms. He said they were going to see Grandpa Henry at the boathouse by the river. Then, with a wave at Grace, they were gone. Well, thought Grace. What's he doing holding Annie's arm and helping her into the house like that? She didn't say she was sick or anything when she came in and hugged me. Back in the kitchen, Grace continued to dry the dishes, very slowly, her head cocked toward the front room. She was trying to hear the conversation, only able to catch a word every now and then. She knew better than to stand in the doorway, dish towel and bowl in hand, listening. She could see Annie sitting and rocking, her head resting on the back of the tall chair. Mother sat next to her, holding her hand. Their voices were low, but their faces didn't seem to show fear or alarm. So what was all this whispering and murmuring about? At last the dishes were dried. But Grace still did not know what the secret was. She carefully joined her mother and sister, and the topic of their conversation was guardedly changed. Annie smiled at Grace and squeezed her hand. "And how are you, my little sister? You're growing taller and prettier every day. I must say Grandma Eliza was right. You are a bonny lass, and you carry yourself gracefully for one still young. You named her right, Mamma." Grace flushed under the smiling appraisal and glance of approval from her big sister. Mother nodded. Grace knew they were sizing her up with pride. She drew a deep breath and smiled almost with embarrassment. Running to the door, she said, "I'm going to see if I can find Papa, Reynolds, and Dell down at the river." Later that evening, Grace hesitantly approached her mother. She wanted to know what was going on. "Mamma, is Annie sick?" she asked. "She didn't seem so, but I thought she looked worried and pale." Mother put her arm around Grace's shoulder. "No, my dear, Annie isn't sick. But I should have known that nothing would get past your sharp eyes." She laughed. "Annie just came to me for some advice and comfort." Now Grace was really puzzled. "You see," Mother went on, "Annie is in the family way, and right now, early on, she's been quite sick to her stomach. She just needed a little comfort and counsel." Grace's ears immediately picked up the words, family way. She knew what that meant. Of course, that subject was never openly discussed in front of children. It was hardly even discussed among adults, except for grown women, and even they always lowered their voices. Grace stammered excitedly, You mean Annie is going to have a baby?" "Oh, how wonderful! Dell is such a cutie. He'll love having a new baby around." Grace almost danced a jig right there in the living room. "Now, Grace, my dear," said Mother, "you just keep your ears open, but your pretty mouth shut. Annie is not making this known just now, so we'll not speak of it to anyone. Let's not steal her thunder. You know what I mean? Let her spread the good news when she chooses, not when we choose." Grace felt herself grinning from ear to ear. It was wonderfully exciting to have such a secret, but she wouldn't even be tempted to share it. It was enough just to know it herself. Okay, Chapter 10, Birthday Girl. Before she knew it, spring had burst upon them. Grace didn't complain, though. The warmer weather brought out the buds on trees, a carpet of green grass, and the yard filled with birds who'd flown up from the south where they had wintered. And spring brought April, the month in which she was born. The morning of her birthday, Grace awoke feeling good. Somehow it seemed that everything was right and nothing was wrong. She felt glad to live in a free country and in the beautiful state of Wisconsin. She felt proud of her government, of her church, and her family. She felt proud of everything. The day before, Miss Simmons had been inspired while teaching American history. Grace and the other children had caught her spirit. "Be proud to be Americans, children," she'd said, and those words rang in Grace's ears as she lay in bed looking at the ceiling. The springtime sun streamed through the window and cast lacy shadows on the wall. Every day before their classes began, Miss Simmons had her students repeat the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States. She told them that a fellow named Francis Bellamy had written the famous words when he was himself in grade school in 1892. That was within their own lifetimes. Miss Simmons had the children place their hands over their hearts when they repeated the beautiful words of the pledge to the American flag, and somehow yesterday the walls of the classroom had seemed to ring with patriotism. As Grace jumped out of bed, she heard a robin chirp its greeting to the morning sun. She looked out the window, and there sat the bird on a branch almost within reach. She hurried to get ready for school. It was a long day in the classroom. Not that she didn't have fun with her classmates. Melissa drew a funny picture for her of a girl wearing a birthday crown. At recess, Margaret led a group in singing "Happy Birthday," and Corliss squeezed her hand and whispered her best wishes. But it was the family party in her own home that Grace was waiting for. And then school was out and she was home. Her mother and sisters shooed her out of the kitchen. She was to have no part in preparing her birthday dinner. And now they were all singing, "Happy birthday, dear Gracie. Happy birthday to you." Grace smiled at the big group seated around the dining table. Her eyes sparkled like the candles on her birthday cake. In a few months, there would be another little face at the table. If Annie comes, that is. A faraway look filled Grace's eyes. She couldn't wait for the baby to come. Of course, most people didn't even know about it. She felt sure that neither Edwin nor John knew yet. "Wake up, birthday girl." Bessie's voice brought her back to the party. For after supper, her mother and Bessie had gone to the kitchen. Here was Bessie with the luscious-looking chocolate cream cake and its glowing candles. With an exaggerated stride and a wide smile, Bessie sashayed up to Grace's chair. "I helped Mama with the frosting. Isn't it pretty? Do you like it?" she asked. Grace gazed at her birthday cake with glowing eyes and then smiled at her sister. "Oh, it's really fancy, and I love it." "Now take a big breath and see if you can blow out all those many candles," joshed Edwin. He winked at his younger brother. "Shall we spank her, John?" "You do, and you'll have me to contend with," threatened Bessie, as she grabbed Grace in a playful, protecting hug. Bessie was 10 years older than Grace and was always ready to protect her. When school started next fall, Bessie was going for Battle Creek, Michigan, where she would train to become a nurse at the famous Battle Creek Sanitarium. "If I hear that any of you are mean to Gracie while I'm gone, I'll get even with you when I come home," Bessie warned with a smile. She squeezed her little sister even tighter. "I'll miss all of you so much. Please write often," she begged. "I think I'm already beginning to have cold feet about being so far away from all of you." Grace threw her arms around her sister. "We'll write regularly, Bessie, and we won't forget you." "Well, let's have that chocolate cream cake. I'm ready," John said, patting his tummy and licking his lips. He loved to eat, especially dessert. "John Dudley Parfit," said Grace, "I do believe you have the biggest appetite of anyone I know. You'll grow up to be tall, wide, and huge, and we'll have to design a house for you with extra wide doorways." Everyone laughed. John loved to tinker and putter with clocks and wheels and springs and mechanical things. When he was stumped, he always consulted Grace, who also enjoyed being challenged. Together, they usually could fix anything. Anything simple, that is. One time, working together, they took a clock completely apart and put it back together. It worked, too. "I'm an inventor, Gracie, and you're an inventor's wife. We're both clever," they had chuckled together. After blowing out her candles, Grace helped her mother cut the cake. First, she gave a big wedge to both her mother and father. Then she cut and passed a slice to each one. A special guest that day was Gustav, Daisy's fiancé. Everyone in the family was taken with the mannerly, courteous, and pleasant Gustav. He was tall and slender, with brown, wavy hair and a good sense of humor. Grace thought he was marvelous, and he returned her admiration. Seeing him with Daisy appealed to her young, romantic heart. Grace handed Gustav a generous slice, and he winked his thanks. "I figured you need a large piece." She leaned across Daisy and whispered in his ear, "You're so lean and lanky." He grinned, happy to be part of their family. "I'll just send it down to my hollow leg," he said. Daisy patted her lips with a napkin. Simply delicious, Mama." She dreamily closed her eyes and wagged her head. "You know, this is my favorite cake. Let's have this at our wedding reception, Gustav." He nodded and placed his arm around the back of Daisy's chair. "That's fine with me," he agreed with fondness in his eyes. "He's none other than Prince Charming himself," Gracie thought. "It's from an old family recipe," Mama told Gustav, "and it's always been a winner. Daisy's grandma Ann Turner made it famous by often making it for church dinners or picnics. I remember her telling me that her own mother, great-grandma Hannah Eddy, was the best cook on the wagon train. That pioneer woman once baked a cake in a Dutch oven over an open campfire. Now that's talent." "Can I have another piece, please, Mama?" begged John, who had, with a few huge bites, already finished his slice. "There's only a little left, John. Let's save that for the birthday girl." "Okay," he replied, but disappointment was written all over his face. "For my birthday, please bake 2 cakes for me, please." John's birthday was just 2 weeks away, and he could hardly wait. He was always active and loved sports. He also had a healthy appetite. "That's a splendid idea. 2 cakes for your birthday," Edwin agreed. "What makes you think you're going to get some of it? I'm going to eat the entire second cake all by myself, John laughed. But they all could see he meant every word, and they knew he'd surely try. Mama smiled at Gracie, her mind years away. Just look at you, Gracie, she said, with her from her chair next to Papa. You have grown quite a bit in 1 year. Do you remember Henry? How when she was first born, the doctor told us to take her out in the sun as much as possible? She was a wee little one. I'll never forget. Guess he just didn't know how strong the members of our Turner Parfit family can be. You're as fine, fit, and healthy as any young girl I know. Happy birthday, honey. She reached toward her youngest child, and Grace slipped into her arms. Mama drew the birthday girl's slender body close to the side of the chair and gave her a hug and a kiss. Grace returned the hug. You're the best mother in the whole wide world. Then she stepped to her father and gave him a resounding kiss on the top of his head. Everyone laughed. She looked at Papa with a grin, and he gave her a quick wink. His slender daughter had his blue-gray eyes, eyes that easily danced with laughter or flashed with disapproval. Unlike her mother's straight hair, Grace's dark brown locks were naturally wavy. Though they tumbled over her shoulders, they were easily manageable. Her chin had a gracious curve, and her mouth was sweet. She was a shyly charming but determined girl. Everyone said Grace was the child who most resembled both sides of the family. The Parfits and the Turners had surely joined together when young Gracie was born, Grandmother Eliza Parfit often said. I can clearly see both her mother and her father when I look at her sweet little face. Grandma had smiled as she cupped Gracie's chin in her hand and placed a soft kiss on her forehead. You're a bonny lassie. Yes, a fair, winsome lass, my sweet child, and Grandma's arms had lovingly surrounded her youngest grandchild. Grace remembered Grandma Eliza with great affection. She'd always loved hearing Grandma tell stories about her beloved old England where she was born and raised. Grace thought Grandma Eliza's English accent was stylish and elegant. Grandma could also speak a little French, too. Grandma Eliza had died just about a year ago. Her family still greatly missed her, and the whole town mourned her, too. When Grandpa and Grandma Parfit first arrived in New London from England with their little ones, they had lived in a log cabin. It was quite a change from the beautiful large manor house where they'd lived in England, and instead of crossing Wisconsin rivers on arched stone bridges, the bridge over the Wolf River was made of broomsticks with ropes on the side to hang on to, Grandma Eliza often told them. Grace would shudder just thinking about crossing the river on such a flimsy bridge. Didn't it swing in the breeze, Grandma? She had asked. Grandma had smiled. Yes, that's why I dreaded crossing it, but in time I got used to it. It was the safety of my children that I worried about. The boys and Bessie thought it was great sport to cross that bridge. I just held my breath and prayed. In her memory, she could still hear Grandma's words and see her sweet face. Chapter 11, The Autograph Book. When everyone had finished their last bite of cake, Mama pushed her chair away from the table. Before we clean up, Grace, you should open your presents, she said. The gifts were stacked on a small table in the living room. It was always exciting to open birthday presents, and wonderful to be the youngest in the family, for everyone got something for her. First, Grace opened a red plaid jumper from Daisy and a pretty blouse to go with it. The blouse had been Hetty's, but Daisy had easily adjusted it to fit Grace and even slightly changed the style. Mama had seen the plaid fabric at Milady's and could not resist buying it. Grace has not had a new dress of her very own in a long, long time, she'd told Papa. It was almost a family project, for Mama had crocheted a pretty lace collar for the blouse, and Daisy made the jumper herself. From Bessie, Grace got a new pair of socks trimmed in red. They'd match the jumper. Pearl's gift was a small book of poetry. Edwin gave her some brand new pencils, and John presented her with a small, multicolored rubber ball. After I helped old Mr. Wellington unload some boxes and put the goods on the shelves there at the general store, John explained, he offered to pay me something, but I told him if it was okay with him, I'd just take the ball. I wasn't expecting him to pay me anything anyway. I just felt sorry for him when he fell on the ice and hurt his back last winter, so I helped him. His store is jammed with so much stuff. You know how he has floor-to-ceiling merchandise on nearly every square inch of wall space, with all those flat irons, stovepipes, saddles, teapots, and all? I figured he just needed help. That was commendable of you, John, said his mother. I was proud of your generous spirit. Matt Wellington is not a young man anymore. I know. When he smiles, he shows more spaces than teeth, John replied with a laugh. Anyway, Gracie, I figured you could use the ball to play jacks. You're right, she exclaimed. I surely do need a new ball. I think Biddy must have bit the old ball a couple of times because it has teeth marks in it. She tossed up the new ball and caught it. My ancient set of jacks must have come over on the Mayflower. Most of the paint is worn off, but that doesn't keep Margaret and me from playing with them. We love them. Actually, Bessie said, thinking, I'm pretty sure that old set of jacks was mine. And before that, they were probably mine, added Pearl. Then you did bring them over on the Mayflower, didn't you, Pearl? Edwin couldn't resist teasing his sister about her age, and Pearl was a bit sensitive about that topic. She'd never had a beau and somehow sensed herself as quickly becoming an old maid. So, of course, Edwin loved to hound her about being elderly every chance he got. Let's see, said Edwin with a frown as he playfully looked at the ceiling. You went to school with Mrs. Jennings, didn't you, Pearl? And you were in the class ahead of us, Pearl replied with a grin. Pshaw, age is not an important issue. With a twinkle in her eye, she added, simply fib about your age and no one will ever know for certain just how old you really are. And that's what she did the rest of her life. A comb and a new hair ribbon were Grace's gifts from Daisy. The red plaid ribbon matched the red plaid jumper. When I saw the bolt of ribbon come into the shop, I told Mama about it, and she said to get it for you, Daisy explained. Mary Ellen tied it all fancy and fastened it to the comb so you can easily slip it into your hair. It will be especially nice if you pull your hair back. Come here, Gracie, I'll show you. So Grace sat next to Daisy, while with a few strokes of the comb, Daisy placed the bow just so. Oh, does that ever look nice, Bessie exclaimed, and all the sisters agreed. I wish I had your hair, Gracie, said Bessie with a rather hopeless smile. It adjusts so easily, and your waves are so pretty. Your hair is wavy, too. Well, sometimes anyway, said Grace, trying to be generous. The family members looked at Bessie and grinned. But I have to use hairpins and crimp my hair in order for it to look like yours, Bessie explained. She shrugged her shoulders and smiled rather hopelessly. The only remaining gift on the table was a small box. Grace opened it and found a small pair of shiny embroidery scissors. One handle was fashioned to resemble the head of a swan. The scissors were from Gustav. Oh, how lovely, Grace exclaimed. She'd never seen anything like it. Thanks, Gustav. They'll easily fit into my sewing box. They're so dainty. They match their lovely new owner, Gustav said with a grin. Thank you, everyone. Grace's face and eyes gleamed. All my presents are so nice. You're welcome, they replied. Oops, said Papa in mock surprise. See here, it's another present. And from behind his back he handed Grace a new jump rope with red handles that he'd fastened to the rope himself. Grace's eyes lit up as she held the rope. Oh, Papa, it's great. I can't wait to use it. Thanks. Just wait till Margaret sees it. All right, girls, let's clean up, said Mama. Boys, your father needs your help at the boathouse, and since it's your birthday, Grace, we'll excuse you from any chores for the rest of the day. Did you say Margaret was coming over? That's probably Margaret now, said Hetty, hearing a knock at the door. Let her in, then go have fun. I'll put your presents away, Gracie. Sure enough, it was Margaret, her eyes sparkling and her smile bright. Happy birthday, Gracie Parfitt. Now we're the same age. Margaret handed Grace a small present wrapped in fancy paper and tied with a bright ribbon. "This is something I know you've been wanting. Hope you like it." "An autograph book," Gracie explained as she unwrapped the gift. "Yes, I've been wanting one. Thank you." She gave Margaret an impulsive hug. "Ever since you got yours for your birthday, I've had a hankering for one. Oh, it's so pretty." The book was small, with a soft, flowered cover, and it was tied with a ribbon on the binding edge. As Grace thumbed through the book, she noticed that Margaret had already signed the very first page and had drawn a heart in each of the 4 corners. It read, "To YSUR, to YSUB, ICUR, 2YS for me. Love, Margaret Murphy. P.S. Yours until Germany gets Hungary and fries turkey in Greece." "Okay, Margaret, you're such fun," laughed Grace, and she turned to show the book to her mother. "It's nice of you to remember Grace," Mama said. She placed her hand on Margaret's shoulder. "Would you like a piece of cake before we put it away? By the way, how's that mother of yours? I haven't seen her lately." "Yes, I'd love some cake. You make the best cake in all of New London, Mrs. Parfit. And yes, my mother's fine. She says to tell you that she hasn't forgotten your birthday's coming up this month, too." Mama laughed. "I'm only 2 weeks older than she is, but she never lets me forget it. She likes to taunt me about being old, bless her soul. Gracie teases me, too, about me being 3 months older than she is, but I like being older. Then I can be the boss." Margaret turned to Gracie and made a funny face. "Yes, you're old and bossy. Your face isn't wrinkled quite like Mrs. Jennings was yet, but it soon will be if you keep making faces at me," Gracie retorted. Then, deliberately squinting carefully at Margaret's head, she said, "Isn't that a gray hair? Margaret, here, let me pull it out so that you won't grow more of them." "Keep your pitiful bony fingers away from my hair, Gracie." "But it shows, Margaret. That red hair of yours shouldn't be spoiled by a gray hair." "My red hair doesn't mind a bit, and neither do I," Margaret laughed, wrinkling her freckled nose. The girls loved to badger each other, but let someone else do it, and there was immediate action. They guarded one another fiercely. Their mothers and their grandmothers had been friends from way back, so it was no wonder that Margaret and Grace were chums. "I like the way you've done your hair, Grace, and the ribbon is so fancy." Margaret obviously approved. "Here, Margaret, have a piece of birthday cake," offered Bessie. Margaret took the saucer and sat on a dining room chair. It was the last piece of cake, but Grace didn't mind at all. Margaret glanced quickly at the gifts as Hetty stacked them up and put them away. "Wow, every present is nice. You're so lucky, Gracie." Margaret pouted with a funny smirk. "I have no sisters, and my brothers can't sew, knit, crochet, or even cook. Papa got me this new jump rope. Look, it has red wood handles. Leave it to Papa to be clever. Won't the girls at school be impressed, especially Lolly and Nola? We'll show them a fancy jump or two." Margaret's eyes twinkled merrily. Grace and Margaret were the best jump ropers in the neighborhood, and all the children knew it. On the playground at school, they were the jump rope champions, and no one ever even challenged them, especially not after the 2 of them had jumped the longest without missing a beat while Miss Simmons counted and timed them. After Margaret finished her cake, she and Grace went outside to play. "Let's try jumping together. You take one handle and I'll take the other, and if we stay close together, we'll fit side by side," Gracie suggested. They skipped along in perfect rhythm, saying, "I asked my mother for 50 cents to see the elephant jump the fence. I asked my mother for 50 more to see the elephant walk the floor. He walked so slow he stubbed his toe, and that's the end of the wonderful show." The next day at recess, Grace took out her new jump rope. Tilda, Melissa, Corliss, and other girls in her class admired the new rope with the red handles and begged to have a turn with it. Grace was happy to share. "Corliss, let's do this alphabetically. Since your name comes first, you may have the first turn. If all of you will jump just 10 times, then everyone will get a chance before recess is over." And that's exactly what the girls did. "Thanks, Gracie," each of them said. "Your rope's the best on the playground," Margaret bragged for her friend. When Lolly came along and asked for a turn, Grace's young heart wanted to say no, but Mrs. Eldridge's words about the golden rule returned to her memory, so even though she felt uneasy about it, Grace handed her rope to Lolly. Just 10 jumps, please, Lolly. That's what the other girls did." Lolly quickly snapped the rope from Grace's hand, and swinging the rope with a swagger, she jumped 10 long, quick jumps away from Grace. "Hey, come back here," called Margaret. "Don't you understand English?" Margaret ran to Lolly and grabbed at the rope. Swiftly, Lolly pulled the rope back and replied, "Oh, I most certainly do understand English, Margaret. I only jumped 10 jumps. But now, of course, I'll have to deliver the rope back to Gracie, won't I?" And she quickly jumped 10 steps back to Grace, dropping the rope at her feet without so much as a smile or a word of thanks. "But that gave you 20 jumps, Lolly," Margaret said with exaggerated patience. "All the rest of us did 10, just as Gracie asked." She was livid. "Goes to show who's clever, don't it, Margaret?" said Lolly with a haughty smirk. "You can't even use good English, Lolly," Margaret hollered as Lolly took Nola's arm and quickly skipped away. "She's a brat," grumbled Margaret. "Yeah, she's a big brat," said the girls. Grace picked up her rope and changed the subject. "I'll bring my long rope tomorrow, and we can do California oranges. Won't that be fun?" At supper that night, Grace told her family how Lolly and Nola had pushed their way into her game. "They always seem to get the upper hand," she said, "and it really isn't fair." "If I'd have been there, I'd have walloped Lolly a good one," John loyally declared, a defiant lift to his chin. "No, that's not the way. Don't be upset by ill-mannered playmates, and don't try to match wits with them on the playground either." Mama's voice was soft, but composed. "The place to match wits with anyone is in the classroom. Give them a run for their money in your studies, and don't let them earn an easy A. You might be surprised and get an A yourself." The children laughed. "You're right, Mama." Edwin cackled with his mouth full of popcorn. "Well, Lolly isn't a top-notch student, so I'll have no trouble there, but she is hard to beat in a fight," Grace said with a downcast look. "Usually Lolly and Nola don't bother with us anyhow." "Be friendly to them, anyway, and ignore their highfalutin ideas," was Hetty's advice. "Margaret and I try to be friendly, but they don't seem to notice. And the more offended you act, the more they'll put on airs." "Well," pondered Grace, "they usually run around with Lolly's older sister, Dovey, and her friends." "Humph," grunted Hetty. "They have a rather high opinion of themselves, so don't let them bother you, Gracie. They probably figure that it gives them prestige to be seen with older girls." What?" Gracie wondered. "Their social standing. That being with the older girls makes them better than their classmates. It really doesn't. Lolly's wrong. She and Nola will have their comeuppance some day, and they'll have to pay the piper. Don't pay any attention to their conceit." Hetty always knew how to console her little sister. "You're a comfort, Hetty. I wish I could be popular like you," Grace sighed. "You'll be a great teacher." Hetty was in high school and very well liked. Everyone knew Hetty and everyone loved her. She planned to go to normal school in Wapaka and get certified in elementary education. Both she and Edwin planned to become teachers. "Just relax, little sister," Bessie said with a smile. "Popularity is a very fickle thing anyway. Overnight it can vanish into thin air. If it's any comfort, I think you're wonderful." Mama looked at Grace, and her heart hurt because Grace was distressed. "My dear young daughter, arguing gets one nowhere. Always remember that the Bible says don't fret yourself because of evildoers. And Jesus also tells us, 'Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God.' Keep in mind those texts." "Did you have squabbly girls around when you grew up, Mama? I can't see that anyone could be worse than Lolly Jones and Nola Hampton." Grace frowned, just thinking about them. "Oh my, yes," Mother laughed. "In this life you'll often have difficult people to deal with." She laughed. "Oh, I remember Nettie Cameron. That girl was a thorn in my flesh when I was a child, but she grew up to be a nice, mature woman. Her husband died young, leaving her with 4 small children, and I felt sorry for her." Grace murmured. It was hard to think of Lolly and Nola as grown up, even though they thought they already were grown up. "Of course, I always had Lucinda Kelly as a forever friend, just as you have her daughter, Margaret. I'm glad the Murphys have remained close to us through the years." She paused. "As far as the playground is concerned, Gracie, there's an easy way to control the jump rope." "But how?" Grace couldn't imagine an easy answer to her problem. "When we're jumping with the long rope, she just comes up and jumps in real quick like." "Tell you what, my girl, everyone needs to learn the lesson of ownership. When you see Lolly coming and about to jump in front of someone, you, as owner, have the right to stop the turning. Put out your hand and grab the rope. In fact, if you are one of the turners, immediately pull the rope tight. There'll be no way anyone can jump rope when the rope itself creates a barrier. Then, quietly ask Lolly to go to the end of the line and tell her you'll be happy to let her jump when it's her turn. She'll get tired of bullying when she finds she is unsuccessful in her attempt to intrude. Of course, that doesn't guarantee that she'll immediately turn into a pleasant, mannerly girl." Papa couldn't help but grin. "My good wife, for as peace-loving a woman as you are, and how you like to foster goodwill, you amaze me at your cleverness." Again, the laughter around the table was cheery. "I remember you giving me that advice too, Mama, when I was Gracie's age," recalled Bessie. "I think growing up is about the only solution sometimes. It just takes time, but it's hard to be patient when you're a kid." "Well, children, listen up," said Papa. "People are people. Some give us joy when they greet us, and some give us joy when they leave us." The children laughed, and he continued, "Don't let others determine your behavior or your self-image. Be your own person." "Sometimes I think boys have it easier than girls do," said Gracie. "John and Edwin never seem to have trials with their friends." "Boys may not be spiteful like girls," Gracie, said her father, "but they too have their tussles with bullies. I remember my little brother Austin having to struggle with that rascal Jeremiah Phillips, but when we finally convinced Austin to stand up to him, the battle was won. Jeremiah was larger than Austin, but one day when he said to Austin, 'So you want to fight?' Austin put up his fist. He stepped right up to Jeremiah and boldly looked him in the eye, then said, 'Ready?' Jeremiah was dumbfounded. He stammered something and walked away, and all the other boys started to laugh. A fight never took place, and Austin became much more confident after that." Papa gently smiled, but his eyes filled with tears. It wasn't often that he spoke of his brother Austin.